Welcome, I'm Peter O'Brien. With the Vietnam War currently dominating our presidential race, I felt it was important that we hear from men who were over there unconnected by politics, who could tell us what went on. I put together a group of 8 men. Between the 8 of them, they served in the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard. The first one arrived in 1963, the last one left Vietnam in 1972. I arranged them chronologically. Jerry Herman arrived during the Kennedy administration as a civilian advisor into the Vietnam area during the beginning of the war. He saw what kind of country we were getting ourselves into. J.D. Perry was a squad leader in a Marine infantry company. He spent his time in the jungle on search and destroy missions and ambushes. He received 3 Purple Hearts. Mac Cranford was an armored cavalry infantry officer. He fought at Tet, a bloody 4-week confrontation which 1 week alone over 500 Americans were killed. He volunteered for second tour of duty in Vietnam so his younger brother wouldn't have to go there. Vic Brown, a naval aviator, flew 115 combat missions off an aircraft carrier in the Tonkin Gulf into North Vietnam. Dennis Plen was on a Coast Guard cutter patrolling the coast of Vietnam. He was also a combat photographer. Gary Miles was a Navy corpsman assigned to a Marine unit. It was his job to move in under fire and try to save wounded Marines. Frank Gallagher flew the helicopters that came to symbolize the Vietnam War. And finally, George Weber was in the Air Force Special Forces as a pararescue specialist. Also trained by the Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, it was his job to rescue downed airmen. I asked all men the same questions and then lined up their answers side by side. The questions I asked them were, first, background about themselves, what was their mission when they were over there? Then also, what was the purpose? What did they feel the U.S. purpose was in Vietnam? And did that sense of purpose change once they got over there? What was the environment like over there, the people, the surroundings? What was Saigon like? What was the enemy like? What went through their mind in combat? Would they share any stories of people they knew who lost their lives? How did the anti-war protests back in America affect them? How was their return to civilian life once they came back from Vietnam? And finally, how would they compare the current war in Iraq with what they went through in Vietnam? Unfortunately, in the filming, I had some camera trouble. It seemed the camera was possessed by some ghost of Vietnam, and occasionally it would shake no matter how much I tied down the camera. Despite this, I think you'll find the responses very moving. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jerry Herman. I was in Vietnam in late 1963 after spending time in the U.S. Navy in Japan, and I joined a civilian firm who was working on naval contracts for development work in Vietnam. We were actually there in preparation of building of a airstrip in the Mekong Delta near a town named Can Tho. My responsibilities there were to run a survey crew, which was doing the preliminary survey for that airstrip.
My name is J.D. Perry. I was in the United States Marine Corps. Went to Vietnam in '66. Got hit, got out of the country, went back again. First time I was with India Company, 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines. Second time I was with Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines. I was a corporal, squad leader. Just general grunt.
My name is Mac Cranford. I was an armored cavalry officer in the United States Army. I served 2 tours, one as a lieutenant, one as a captain. First tour was 1967, 1968. The other was 1969 to 1970.
My name is Vic Brown, and I was a naval aviator during the Vietnam conflict in the years 1967 and 1968. I flew off of aircraft carriers over in the Gulf of Tonkin during that time.
My name's Dennis Plen. I was a radioman 2nd class in the United States Coast Guard. I was in Vietnam from 1967 to halfway to 1968.
My name is Gary Miles. I was a hospital corpsman in the Navy, attached to the 3rd Marine Division, Bravo 19, 3rd Marine Division. I went to Vietnam in 1968, just missed Tet, got back in 1969. Pretty much the whole time I was there, I was in I Corps.
Hi, my name is Frank Gallagher. I was a Chief Warrant Officer, helicopter pilot in Vietnam. I flew Hueys, Charlie 10 gunships, and at the end of my tour, had the opportunity to fly the Cobra when it came into country. I was there at the end of 1969 to the beginning of 1971, returned home March 31st, 1971.
Hello, I'm George Weber. I was a sergeant in the Air Force. I was in pararescue, and I was in Southeast Asia in 71 and 72. Our mission was to retrieve downed airmen, whatever we needed to retrieve, go down, pick it up, bring it back home.
As I said, we were doing survey work for an airstrip over there, and part of my responsibilities were to run that survey crew and to interface with the South Vietnamese Army for protection for the crews while they were in the field.
My job over there, first time, was just a rifleman in a Marine squad. I became a fire team leader, a squad leader. Went out, did a lot of patrolling, search and destroy, ambushes, booby trapping stuff. CAC unit, which was a combined action company, where we went to a little ville and we'd have 17 or 18 of us, and we'd protect the ville from the NVA. My entire time was up in I Corps, right up by the Ben Hai River, from Khe Sanh over to Con Tien, all the way to Gia Linh, Camp Carroll, the entire northern section of South Vietnam.
My first tour, I served as a platoon leader in an armored cavalry regiment, executive officer of the Armored Cav Troop. And then my second tour, I was on the general staff of the 101st Airborne, and then I served as a tank company commander on the DMZ, the northern part of South Vietnam.
Our mission was to leave the carrier deck first, prior to the strike aircraft, and what we did was we were electronic countermeasures aircraft, and we left the carrier before the strike aircraft, and we went parallel to the coast of Vietnam. We picked up their early warning radar that was going to, of course, track the strike aircraft, and what we would do is we would jam their radar scopes with electronic emissions to cloud their radar, so they wouldn't pick up the strike planes as they were coming, what we call feet dry, over land from the carrier.
I was a radio operator on the Coast Guard cutter Campbell, which was a 328-foot weather cutter. But in the Coast Guard, everybody had 2 billets. You did 2 jobs. And aside from being a radio operator, when I was in New York before we left for Vietnam, I was a search and rescue photographer. That billet got changed over to a combat photographer once you got to Vietnam, because we were part of the 7th Fleet. That's what happens to the Coast Guard. You become part of the Navy.
My job was corpsman, combat corpsman. In the Army, they call that a medic. The Marine Corps calls it a corpsman. And I was pretty much in the bush all the time. The last couple months in country, I was brought back to the rear, but most of the time I was in the bush.
When I first got over to Vietnam, I was what they call Peter pilot. He's a new guy in country. He's a warrant officer right out of flight school. And my job there was, as a co-pilot, learning how to fly, really. Even though we came out of flight training with 210 hours of helicopter time, we were shipped over to Vietnam, and that's where we really learned how to fly. In the beginning, when I first came into country, I was just outside of Saigon in a place called Plantation. I flew Hueys, and those are just the troop carriers. I was in the 195th Assault Helicopter Company, and we'd go around and insert troops and extract them from combat zones, LZs, landing zones. And then about 4 months after being there, I transferred into our gunship platoon, which covered the Hueys as they placed and picked up troops off out of the LZs. So I flew Charlie model gunships there. And after about 7 months in that area, in 3 Corps and a little bit in 2 Corps, and flying into Cambodia and that sort of stuff, we had camouflage ships. We'd go over at night and drop people off in the ladders and things. However, after about 7 months, my company deroast, that is, they went home, and I was shipped up to Chulai, up in I Corps, and there I flew Hueys again, and then transferred into AH-1Gs, the Cobra, one of the first Cobras in the country, and flew those as gunships.
Okay, on a typical mission, we'd be called on alert. We'd pile into the truck and head on to the helicopters. We'd get our briefing to what we're going to be running into up ahead. The A-1 Sandys, these are World War II aircraft that we'd have for support. They'd soften up the area for us before we went in, because it'd be hostile area. Usually where the pilot got shot is where he ended up for the most part. So we'd have to go on in there and assess the situation, soften it up if we need to, and go in when we could.
Civilian life for me right before I went into Marines was good. I was playing college football, having a great time, working, had a steady job, a lot of friends, pretty popular. Life was great. The 60s were wonderful, and Vietnam came along, and coming from a military family, went ahead and joined the Marines.
I was a regular Army officer. My first tour, I was ordered to Vietnam. Second tour, I volunteered to go.
I elected to join the Navy in the flight program. I always wanted to do that right out of college in Florida. I went to college in St. Petersburg, Florida, and flight training was in Pensacola, Florida, so that was convenient. And so I went directly from college into flight training, which was a year and a half at Pensacola, and then outline training from there prior to going overseas.
Before I enlisted, I was selling soft goods in New York City. I was 19, and I made calls on all the major department stores selling bathing suits and intimate apparel.
Before I went into the service, I was attempting college, actually Sonoma State and Santa Rosa Junior College both. I wasn't doing too well in college other than the partying aspect. And I did have friends that were being drafted. At the time, the Marine Corps was also drafting. Rather than being drafted into the Marine Corps or the Army, I joined the Navy, who promptly made me a corpsman and sent me to the Marines.
Well, I was over there. I volunteered. I was 19 years old, and I partied my way out of UC Santa Barbara, and I lost my student deferment, and got a letter and said greetings. So I always had wanted to fly. So I quick ran around to the Air Force and the Navy and the Marines, and they all said I had to have a college education or fly jets. So, but they said you could go to the Army, and have you thought about flying helicopters? So I said no. So I went down there and took a fast test and took some physicals, and they said, "You're our boy." So the next thing I knew, I was packed off in 1968, October 14th, 1968. Left for Fort Polk, Louisiana. Went through my basic training there, and that's how I got into the Army, and then went right into flight training after basic training.
Okay, I was in Southern California. I graduated at Morningside in Inglewood, Southern California. I knew I probably wasn't going to be a good student right away in college, and I knew I didn't want to be in the in the Army or the Marines. So I had to make some decisions on, well, is it going to be Navy or Air Force then? I took a test in high school, and I came out pretty good, above average in the Air Force test there, so I went with them. And we all ended up over in Vietnam eventually. I volunteered actually for the pararescue. In high school, let me go back, I was wanting to be a fireman. That's what I was intending on doing before I went into service. So this kind of went hand in glove there with rescue work over in Vietnam. And I figured the only way to know what's going on over there is to be there myself. So that's why I went.
My sense and understanding of our purpose and the purpose of America being in Vietnam at that time was really a deterrent to the expansion of communism by communist China. There was a sense throughout Southeast Asia at that time that there was potential invasion of that area by China, either through military invasion or through subversion of governments that were there. The brief time I was there, that really didn't change. This was prior to heavy fighting in Vietnam, prior to heavy troop commitment, and that sense remained throughout the time that I was there.
When we were in boot camp, we were told that, you know, the domino effect, that if South Vietnam falls, all the rest of Asia will fall into communist hands. And yeah, we probably believed a lot of that crap at first. That was the general purpose, we thought, for going there, saving the South Vietnamese people, similar to Korea. My dad was in Korea in World War II. We thought we were doing the right thing. The longer we were there, it was pretty obvious by '69 it was a total waste.
If you think back 35 or 40 years ago, why was America in Vietnam? Lots of different reasons, I think. We were there to stop communism. There was a domino theory of Southeastern Asia. I think we were there in large part to help the Vietnamese people. Obviously, there were lots of different factions involved with those folks. The people I saw out in the field, they wanted to grow rice and be left alone. The politicians had a different story. Vietnam had a long, bloody history of being divided from the French to the Americans. Before that, it was an area of the world that was in great turmoil. The Chinese were doing lots of different things and threatening. So historians have written probably thousands of pages of why America was over there. I don't know, I can give you my perspective and my answer, but that's pretty much the way I think about it.
You know, I think our purpose of being over there and fighting Vietnam was, as people look at it today, is pretty vague, and why were we there? My thought, and the reason we were there is, well, first of all, I was sent over there by our commander-in-chief, and I think that's an important issue. And as far as my personal thoughts and issues, you know, I believe that communism was on a stronghold at the time. the North Vietnamese were being assisted by the Russians and the Chinese. That I think their goal was to take over Laos and Cambodia and all of Southeast Asia, and who knows where it would have gone from there. So I think that was the purpose of our government, and I was a commissioned officer dedicated to doing what our commander-in-chief had us do, and that was my goal.
I'm not really sure what our purpose was in being there. I think maybe at first it really was to root out the godless communists, stop Asia from falling. I really don't know. At the time that I went, I wasn't paying a lot of thought to it. I just knew I just had to go, whatever it was, the reason.
Yeah, I felt that we were over in Vietnam at the time when I was over there. When I first went over, and I joined the Army and went over, was that I thought we were going to be, fighting communism, stopping it from taking over another country, and I felt that like democracy was the best answer to, their environment, their situation over there. However, when I got over there, I started looking at what was happening, and I was questioning really what were we doing any good bringing democracy to a country that maybe didn't really want it. We had a few discussions about this in the tents and in near the DMZ and over in Quezon. I mean, it was a pretty hot topic at the point, because we were watching our friends die, and we were wondering, what's the purpose here? So my attitude about being over in Vietnam did change while I was over there, through the course of putting troops in, pulling them out, picking up the wounded, that sort of stuff.
Okay. On going over there, I felt that I owed the country something. I mean, to live in this country, I think you owe something somewhere. You got to pay your dues however you can. After being there, well, I spent 2 tours over there, and the more I found out about how things were being run there, the waste of life and everything, I've really changed my mind, and I'm not very articulate with this, but it really soured me with our leaders of our country and the way things were run, and the lack of respect for these people over here that I was picking up. I saw a lot of people walking around, young men, boys, I guess, with such a vacant look on their face, and it was not right. There was no reason that anybody would give for being there. There was no reason given to why we couldn't attack the radar sites, which would blind them so that they couldn't see us in our movements and stuff. It was all unauthorized and coming from Washington. They were running the show from there. And meanwhile, we're picking up the kids over there who were paying the price. I don't know how to really stress this enough, that you can't follow leaders if they don't care about you. They'll lie. They'll do whatever they have to do to make their agenda go, or whatever they're doing, their power, their wealth, whatever. I saw too many people ruined.
While I was there, in the Delta area where I was, the roads were relatively safe to travel during the daylight. At night, the entire countryside belonged to the VC. So we were told and coached to be cautious about how we spent our time, never to develop habits that would be repeated. So you tried to not do the same thing one day that you did the day before. There were in the same hotel that I stayed in Canton advisors who were working with the Vietnamese army, and they were actually out on parole trying to engage the VC and do what they needed to do out there. The Vietnamese army that I worked with for our protection were particularly not interested in engaging the VC. They were mostly defensive, trying to show enough mass in their movements so that they would not be attacked by the VC. And while we were there, we were not attacked, nor were any of our crews attacked. However, there was indications of motivation by the VC in the area to try and eliminate our crew and to try and harass us and to get us out of the area. The attitude of the local people in Vietnam was really unique for me. I had the opportunity to travel throughout Southeast Asia in my military service over there. I traveled in Korea and Taiwan and in the Philippines and all over Japan, and generally Americans were well received at that time. Kids were anxious to talk to you and so on. When I got to Vietnam, it was a different sense. It was a sense of kind of a sense of unhappiness. There was not really a lot of joy, and even among the children in Vietnam, not a lot of laughter and joy. Everything was much more solemn. It was a difficult life. I had an opportunity on one occasion when I was going with the crew through the area that we were surveying, which was really the swamps of the Delta area, and we came into a village. And through the interpreter that worked with me, I met an old lady there who probably was in her 40s or 50s, but looked to us as though she might have been 70 or 80. I have no idea what her age was. But we started talking with her, and she asked me if I was American, and I said, yes, I was American. And I said, what do you think about the Americans being here in your country? And her response was kind of interesting. She said, well, you know, first the Chinese came and they were here and they took my rice. And then the Japanese came and they took my rice. And then the French came and they took my rice. And now the VC are here and they're taking my rice. I suppose when you people come, you'll want my rice too. And it was just kind of a sense of desperation, of no hope for the ending of what had been a lifetime of war for her and a lifetime of oppression by one country and then the other. And that was kind of the tragic feeling that one got from the people there, that there wasn't any hope, that there was, this was just going to go on forever.
The environment over there, up in I Corps, was right up on the North Vietnam border, Laotian border. It was all considered a free fire zone. If they weren't Marines, they were targets. It's the only way we could stay alive. And there were times when we even saw the NVA in full Marine gear. They were pretty slick tricks, those guys. Have respect for them. The terrain was from very rugged, dense, 12-foot elephant grass that was sharp as razors to cliffs and hillsides, rocky knolls. The rock pile was almost straight up and down, sheer rock, shale, make a lot of noise. Had to be airlifted in. It was hell getting up it, down it. The Razorback was just about the same. And yet Quezon was a beautiful place at first. And you look over toward Poi Lane's coffee plantation, it was real pretty scenery until it all got defoliated and blown to hell. Some very, very beautiful country in that portion of Vietnam until the war really got going good, and then the defoliation and the explosions and everything else, the bombing, carpet bombing, just wiped out everything.
I guess the next question is, what was the environment like in Vietnam, the terrain, the people? Vietnam is a beautiful country. It ranges from beautiful sandy coastal beaches, the Mekong Delta, mountain highlands, flat plains, rolling hills in the north, much like you'd see in California, up in our so-called, or up in our gold country. The people were very simple. They grew rice in rice paddies. They were farmers. Lived in small villages. You had large cities like Saigon, Hue, and other areas that were much more cosmopolitan, or influenced by the French. In the southern part of the country, where I was for a period of time, you'd see large rubber plantations that were run by the French. So.
The environment, flying off of aircraft carrier, flying inland or paralleling the shore, was hostile day and night. There was a very determined, I'll call it, enemy, the North Vietnamese. There was a lot of casualties flying off the carrier. You never knew when you were going to come back, or there would be vacant seats in the ready room of those that didn't come back. So the environment, day and night, was very hostile.
The environment over there was quite unusual. I had never been to Asia before. It was extremely hot and humid, and it was extremely beautiful. And doing a lot of photography over there, it reminded me very much of the South Pacific and the sunsets and rainstorms and whatever. The people that I didn't come in contact with a lot of the local people. I did come in contact with a lot of Filipino people, and they seemed just fine to me, but I was surrounded by more Americans.
The terrain was where I was in I-Corps, was in places just beautiful, very, very dramatically beautiful, giant straight up and down cliffs, really pretty, except for where the bomb craters and stuff were. The allies we supposedly had, mostly being the South Vietnamese Army, I didn't think a lot of then, and I still don't think a lot of. The enemy, I don't know. The Viet Cong was pretty much a non-issue in I-Corps, and I think their back was pretty well broken during Tet anyway. But the North Vietnamese soldiers were tough little monkeys. They were a force to be reckoned with. I had a lot of respect for them, and no respect for the South Vietnamese Army. Friends, I was taught not to make friends because you never knew when you were going to lose them, and you had to be around to patch up whoever was left, no matter what your emotions were doing. But it was impossible. It was impossible. I think the closest friends I ever had in my life were in Vietnam.
Well, the environment in Vietnam was unlike the United States. It was hot, humid. There was monsoons. In 3 Corps, which is around the Saigon area, it was green, lush. There were rivers. The Mekong River flowed through it. There was there were some forests, rolling hills. There was a mountain outside of Saigon, just north of Saigon, I think. It was called Nui Ba Den, Black Virgin Mountain, and it just rose out of the plains. It was just an interesting sight. You could always tell where you were in relationship to that mountain. And when I transferred north to close to the DMZ in I-Corps, about Vietnam, they divided it up into 4 sections. They had I-Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, and 4 Corps. I-Corps, they called it I-Corps because it was just the language we used then instead of 1 Corps. That area up there, as you went further north, became more mountainous. The foliage became thicker, denser. the mountains more rugged. We flew outside of Chulai. And to the west, the mountains in the valleys you had to watch out for because the gun emplacements and that sort of stuff, the enemy gun emplacements. So basically that was it. It was a hot, humid area. The people I ran into were pretty much the same in all sections. As I went further north, became more agrarian. But there were farmers everywhere. I've got pictures of water buffalo and kids taking care of the water buffalo and farmers, and out in the rice fields in their black pajamas, and the same was up north also, except that the rice fields were terraced up the mountainsides. There were very few roads. And there was one that I remember, it was Highway 1, and it went from north to south, and then also out to from along I-4 out to Quezon into Laos. I just remember the heat and the smell. The smell of the country was a little different. I mean, every country I think has its own odor, as it were, and Vietnam is still sticks with me. I don't know what I can't even describe it. It's just different, just a different smell.
Okay, I was based in Thailand, so I didn't have to deal with a lot of the Vietnam issues, the restrictions and stuff. So I had a little more freedom of movement, and I'd get on a bicycle and take off into the rice paddies or the jungles around Nakhon Phanom, and I'd run into the local people out there, which they were poor as anything, but they had big smiles. I mean, just shows you money ain't everything. But they were very friendly, the most friendly people I think I've met in my 4 years in the service. It was an education for me. You know, I'd run into like old temples out there with all the religious people out there, and they'd want me to come in and kind of show them English kind of things. You know, as limited as I was with Thai, they were with English, so, you know, but it was a good exchange. It was interesting, very good. I was in air crew, so I was able to go in a lot of different areas. I was in Laos, I was in North Vietnam, I was in South Vietnam. The country was just beautiful. I mean, I loved it. I was in a helicopter flying slow in the karst area. That's rock formations that come off the floor up to about a couple thousand feet straight up. And up in there, in some of the little caves and crannies up there, the local people, I don't know how they did it, but they have all sorts of little Buddhas and relics and stuff just up in the top parts of that. And, it was just pretty interesting. When I went to Da Nang, this is a whole different thing here. This is the nasty parts. You're very restricted in your movement there. Off base was off limits except for certain areas, China Beach and things like that. The base was just as hostile inside as it was outside. The different racial groups were all armed, of course. So there was all the confrontations between the Americans in there and whatever. It was just hard living there. And I was glad that I was from Nakhon Phanom, because I could go off base and have a place and relax as much as you could there. And I was right along the Mekong River there. You know, it was kind of relaxing. The people that took me in there, I rented a house from them. They would take me up and down the river in their cars, to visit their friends and all that. So I got to see stuff that most people really wouldn't, and I was really appreciative of that. To be at least comfortable in that situation.
Saigon at that time was still a very vibrant city. There was terrorist activity going on there, and occasionally there would be a bomb explosion or something like that. But other than that, the downtown Saigon was very beautiful. The Vietnamese are an attractive people. The Vietnamese address is very attractive, and the old hotel in downtown Saigon was a real gem. Just to sit on the front porch and watch all the people moving by and the traffic moving by. There were excellent restaurants in Saigon, a very pleasant place to be, and pretty much oblivious to what was going on in the countryside. Not much of a sense of war or activity in Saigon. Saigon was safe to walk and move about everywhere, and kind of separate from what was happening in the countryside, but a delightful place to visit at that time.
So I was in Saigon around 1970, and I flew. I didn't go into Saigon that much. I went a couple of times on the ground. Most of the time, every once in a while we'd have what they call an ash and trash mission, where one helicopter would pick up somebody or something and deliver it to a different spot around Saigon. And I had the opportunity to take some generals and high-ranking officials to the embassy and land on the roof there. The MAC-V was there. That was the intelligence in Vietnam, and I remember sitting on top of the embassy looking down. You might remember those pictures from 1975. Where the people were being loaded into the helicopters and taken out. But I remember looking down there and looking at all the swarm of people, of humanity. I mean, they're just going every which way. And they mostly had these little moped motorbikes, and they had the Vespa motorcycles, and there were scooters, and people everywhere. And it was just a bustle of activity. And they had all these little cheap trinkets and things like that they were selling, and people shopping and working, and prostitutes working the streets. And, I mean, that was it. That was Saigon.
The question of what was the enemy like, there were varied, a lot of differences from being down around Fubai up in northern Icor. There was Chinese advisors. There was a few Russians that we got. They were all NVA. They were professional soldiers. They were in it from the beginning to the end, whatever that took. They were hard. They were well disciplined. Masters at camouflage. They were willing to do whatever it took to win. They did a lot of sapper activity where they would, blow themselves up just to get you. Whatever it took, they were out to win it.
Question is, what was the enemy like? You had two different enemies. One was the North Vietnamese regular army. I would say they were very well trained. They were highly motivated. They could do very difficult tasks. The second enemy was the local Viet Cong, and these were people indigenous to southern Vietnam, and they were sort of like a local militia, I guess, if you could characterize them that way. But they were guerrillas. They lived in the villages by day, and would fight you at night, as opposed to the North Vietnamese, who were organized into regular platoons, companies, and larger military formations. But they were a tough, determined enemy. They were fighting for what they believed in. So there was a large difference later on in the war between, our troops and their troops.
The North Vietnamese army was probably one of the most determined fighting force that we've seen in many wars. They were dug in. They were determined to win this war, and they knew there was resistance back in the United States of doing certain things that could have stopped them, like bombing Haiphong Harbor in Hanoi, which we were prohibited from doing for most of the conflict. So they knew that, they dug in, they're very, very capable.
The enemy, for the most part, where I was the North Vietnamese Army, and occasionally a Chinese advisor. And they were ornery. They were a pretty tough bunch of little guys, and they had a goal. They were in it for the duration. I was in it for a year if I made it, but they didn't know when it was going to be over. And I do have a lot of respect for them.
Well, the enemy is hard to define, or was hard to define, still is actually. They were basically faceless people. I can't describe exactly who they are or what they were. I just know that they shot at me and I shot back, and that was about the end of it. However, you always heard stories. I didn't experience this personally, but I remember people talking to me about their barber. They would come, the Vietnamese would come and work on the bases, and I remember this one story where this base was attacked at night and they were shooting and fending off the enemy, and they came out in the morning and there was the barber that was been shaving him the day before on the wire. So you didn't know who the enemy was. It was kind of an uncertain feeling.
Okay, the Vietnamese, as you may have known, were occupied by the French for many, many years before we came there. And I don't think that they ever saw us as anything but being occupiers and somebody trying to exploit their country. And I kind of feel the same. I don't feel I belonged over there to take out any of them. But that's where we were, and as they were intelligent people. They were dedicated to their cause, and it was their country, and they were very patient in their way of conducting themselves in their wars, digging their tunnels, moving the equipment that nobody thought that they could move across mountains or rivers, whatever, and they would get that stuff up there. And you'd be messing with a lot of heavy stuff, and you wonder how they got it there, and it was all on their backs. That's where their strength was they thought they were right, and they probably were. It was their country.
The question of what goes through a person's mind in combat, I imagine, is as varied as each individual that's in combat. When the shit hits the fan, first thing you do is react, and if your reactions are good, you'll live. If they're not, you're probably going to die. If you pause or hesitate one moment, you're done. And that can be anything from a booby trap to ambush being set off against you, or you setting off an ambush and not having your claymore set right, just anything like that. But the bottom line is it's sheer terror, and you don't know how long it's going to last. You don't know if you're going to be alive when it's over. You don't have time to be afraid of nothing. You're afraid before and after, but not when you're mixing it up. Then you're just cool, calm, collected. You do your job and pick up the pieces when it's over. Being asked to share a combat experience, there was a lot of lunacy over there. You do stupid things. You'd go take a place and then leave it after you took it and fought for it. That was real hard on a lot of the guys, because you had to bag and tag a bunch of your friends and send them out in choppers, and afterwards you'd leave the area that you just fought to get, and it was pretty hard on the mind to figure why we were leaving and not keeping the terrain that we had taken. And at night, before you go on your LPs and stuff, you talk to the other guys, and everybody pretty much had the same idea. Why don't we take it and keep it? Keep Sir Charles away from it, deny him access. But we just move out the next day or whatever and go somewhere else and do it all over again.
The question's being asked, what goes through your mind in combat? In my job, in my position, what I'm thinking about is where's the bad guy, what's going on, how do I defeat him, you know, how do I maneuver my troops, because that was basically my job. You know, it's hot, scary, dirty, smelly work. It's confusing. It's hard many times to figure out what to do, where to go, what's your next move, that kind of thing. As people like to say, you know, what's the fog of combat and the fog of war? I think it's absolutely true. But those are the kinds of things that would go through my mind is, you know, we're in a fight, you know, what do I do? You know, where do I go? How do I deploy everybody? How do I get them moving around the battlefield? Most firefights in Vietnam lasted, they were very quick, sharp engagements, would last no more than a day or two at most. Some lasted a couple of hours. And they'd be done, they'd be gone, everybody would disappear.
Combat was very interesting flying off of the carrier. At any given moment, you're on alert and very concerned and scared. I had one of the first night flights into North Vietnam, the Haiphong area, when we were allowed to go in there. And as we were flying in, it was amazing because it turned out to be like the 4th of July. It was at night and just everything lit up. They were firing surface-to-air missiles like they were going out of style. And so a lot of explosions, a lot of chatter on the radio, a lot of sounds like I'm hit, I'm going down, and so it was actually terrifying.
We were not in a lot of combat. We did something called Operation Schoolhouse, which is basically to patrol 1 mile out from there to 12 miles out, intercept junks and contraband and boats that were coming in with explosives. So we did a lot of boarding, that type of thing. We were attacked twice by aircraft. Of course, we were told the enemy didn't have aircraft. And so, you know, what goes through your mind when that happens? For me, it was fire, because fire is terrible on a ship. And for some reason, it was like, oh my God, it's on fire. And that's the one thing that's sort of stuck in my mind.
What went through my mind in combat, other than the obvious fear, was the fact that once it hit the fan, you really didn't have too much time to worry about what was going through your mind. You just had time to react. I heard a lot of corpsing up. That doesn't leave time for thinking about it. That means just move, get moving, keep moving. Hope to God that it isn't going to be you, and hope to God it isn't going to be any of your buddies. There isn't probably any combat veteran of any combat anywhere ever that isn't an instant convert to God once the stuff hits the fan.
What goes through your mind in combat is nothing. I mean, really. It's, I don't know how to describe it. It's pure survival or reactive, and your training takes over. It's probably much the same as when you're playing sports and you're in the heat of the battle, whatever it is, if you're playing football or soccer or baseball or whatever, and you're totally in the moment. There's absolutely, at that point, there's no fear. I didn't experience the fear at that point. Afterwards, I was kind of shaken, of course, but during the battle, It was just everything was clear, and you were doing whatever you could to get out of that situation.
Okay, as far as combat goes, being on a helicopter, you really don't see the enemy that much. You usually see the flashes, the tracers, explosions in the air. On one mission coming across the Ho Chi Minh Trail, we've just picked up our survivor. We're kind of heading back to camp as best we could. We were up about from 10,000 feet, and we started picking up AAA. There was just popcorn popping all around us, just like in the movies. And I wasn't, I got the call. I was in the cabin part of the helicopter and said, hey, we're picking up some fire. Better get back there. So I was the number 2 gunner, or actually number 3 on the tail. And that was the only guy who could really get a good shot off there. So without putting on the restraining harness, I kind of jumped under the line there, and just jumped onto the gun and started shooting. And your vision, it seems cloudy, but it's clear. Your peripheral, you can see everything that's going on, and you're pretty much pinpointed on what's got your attention. And there's no fear of like I'm going to fall out of the aircraft or I'm going to get hit or any of that stuff. That's just not acceptable. You're not thinking that way. You're just thinking, well, we got to take care of what's causing the problem here. Take out the guns or whatever that's trying to take out our aircraft and our people. On this particular mission here, we were supported by the Sandys, the A1 Sky Raiders. They went down and pretty well wiped out the area down there. I was flying another 10-15 minutes and we could still see flames leaping from the jungle down there. And it's not a feeling of being afraid. It's just a feeling of the job you got to do. You're trained to do it. Let's get the job done. Let's go home.
As for sacrificing, everybody over there sacrificed. They all gave some gave all. And the old adage that the rich boys weren't in that war, I'm here to tell you that they were. I knew a Navy admiral's son that was in it. He was just a E4 grunt like me. There was another guy, Otto Charles Graybill. He was the only sole surviving son, heir to the Graybill pipe fortune. He died right up by the Ben High River on what was called McNamara's Line. The last thing he said was tell his family he got hit in the head so he didn't suffer. When in reality, he slowly bled to death in that scorching heat. And there was no need for any of it. We could never figure out a need or a reason or anything to justify any of it.
I think I mentioned before, there's a lot of young guys, and I was a young guy back then, that didn't come back to the carrier. I won't name names specifically, but it was very apparent when it was time to recover the aircraft, when there's on a lot of missions where the aircraft didn't come back. They were either shot down and killed, or many of them ended up in what we call the Hanoi Hilton, which is a concentration camp in Hanoi, including obviously the most famous John McCain. So a lot of young guys, a lot of friends of mine didn't come back from those missions.
Okay, being as it's war, we lose people there, and we lose friends. On one occasion, I'll tell you about a couple friends of mine. They were based at Nakhon Phanom with me. They were on a mission that took them all the way down into Cambodia, trying to get around the bottom end of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, I suppose. But however, something happened to them there, and I'm believing a shell to the cockpit or something, because it was just immediate. There was no response. When the other chopper came back to check out and find out where he was, they found a burning heap down in the jungle, but they did find 2 chutes. One I heard was stretched out across the trees, like the guy tried to grab the chute on the way out of the helicopter and hold on to it and pull the ring, which he just didn't have any time. It didn't open. The other one, he used his chute. He was stuck in the trees and he used his let-down tape. So he was alive and he got down somewhere down in Cambodia there. The official report goes is they were either killed or missing, and that doesn't set right with me. It hasn't set right ever, because some other son was down there, my friend, and they more or less just let him go. He was in Cambodia. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but they had services for him and everything, and they sent a letter home, I guess, to his mom saying he wasn't coming back. I don't care where in the world he went down. I think we should have pulled him back if we could. And that still sits with me today.
When I came back the first time, I was on convalescent leave. The protests were going on in California. I had to go down to the recruiter to check in every day, and getting involved with them people only got me thrown in jail, so it was a lot easier for me to just stay at home and heal up quick and get on back to the guys. But I guess there was quite a bit of it. I know it was on the news, and it just made us doubt ourselves. And then as soon as we'd get with the rest of the guys, we'd tighten it right back up again. And we felt we were doing the right thing and we were going to win. The trouble is we weren't allowed to win. We were winning when I left.
The anti-war demonstrations, I think I was out of the country for a lot of them. Maybe that was fortunately during that time period of 67, 68, then it got a little worse, 69, 70. They didn't really have much of an impact on me. I have a great deal of respect for people who, to have their right to their say. It certainly had a very large impact on our country, but for me personally, I didn't pay much attention to them. I respected their right to protest, voice their opinion. I had a lot more respect for those people who took to the streets than I did the guys who ran off to Canada.
I know there's a lot of dissension to this war, and while we were over there fighting or participating in the conflict, I'll call it, we knew that there was a lot of protesting going on, but it didn't affect me at the time because we had a mission to do, and that's what we did. So we went forward.
The question is, have the anti-war protests back in America affect me? I'm not sure they affected me so much. I didn't understand them at all. I couldn't understand everybody working in that heat and getting shot and getting killed, and people back home basically, undermining what we were doing. I just didn't understand that. I didn't understand how anybody could do that, frankly. And that's kind of what I thought about it.
I don't remember that the protests, the anti-war protests, and the stuff was going on back in the States. I don't think it affected me. I don't remember it bothering me. There really wasn't too much time to reflect on it. I know there was there was a lot of anger toward that kind of stuff going on. Although I'm not real sure to this day, if I had been here instead of over there, I wouldn't have joined in. I don't know now.
So the anti-war protests back in America affected all of us. That was one of the other things that we discussed in the tents and out in the field. Everybody had their own opinion about it, of course. Some people were really angry about it and felt that we should be supported back in home. And actually, I took a different view of it. I felt, and I expressed this too, I felt that none of us who were there really wanted to be there after we'd been there for any period of time and saw what was going on. And I said, these people back there who are protesting are just trying to get us home. And I said, more power to them, So I didn't harbor any ill feelings about the protesters at all?
Okay, as far as the anti-war situation, before I was in the service, I was in a band and I was singing, all the songs and everything too. But we got to live our lives and take care of our responsibilities too. So while in Vietnam, the anti-war protesting didn't set right with me. I was there trying to just be a good American over there, protecting what I thought was American values, etc. I didn't run off to Canada, but I didn't feel like coming back home after the first tour. As bad as war is, and it is bad, I didn't want to come back to Americans treat me bad, to call me a baby killer, spitting on me or whatever, because I don't think I would have handled that very well either. So I just stayed where I could do my job the best, and finished out my time there, and then came home.
Coming home was a very difficult process, unlike World War II veterans who were very well appreciated by the country. The Vietnam vet was not appreciated. He was scorned, he was spit at. They threw cans of stuff at us and shit, and really made you wonder what it was all done for. But on the other hand, when you would go somewhere to try to get a job and support yourself and your loved ones, they'd ask if you're a Vietnam vet. If you said yeah, they'd ask, well, were you a combat vet? You say yeah, and you didn't get the job, somebody else got it. They didn't want us loose cannons working in their places. They'd always give the jobs to somebody else, and that made it real difficult to handle. I guess you never really get over all that. You carry a grudge, and you just get a job that you can do, that you don't really have a boss or nobody around or workmates and stuff like that, and then you can get along pretty well. Otherwise, we're still adjusting, or at least trying to, and who knows if we'll ever make it.
When I came back from Vietnam in 1970, I was stationed at the Presidio, San Francisco, still in the service. I was on the Army's general staff back there. It was a very nice duty station, not a lot of work to do. It was a very pleasurable thing after being overseas for almost 2 years straight. And quite frankly, I love San Francisco, and the Department of the Army called me up one day and said, it's time to go to Europe. And I said, nope, see you later. I'm out. Too much fun in Sausalito.
After I left Vietnam, my final duty station was in Hawaii, kind of a liaison to the Air Force, doing some very highly classified information regarding flights over Vietnam, which I can't talk about. But so I spent a year there, and then after that assignment, I traveled around Europe for a number of months before I came back to the United States. And it was kind of in the hippie era, and I just didn't let that bother me. I went on with my life, and I didn't get in major arguments with people about it.
My adjustment back to civilian life, once I got out of service, was frankly very easy. New York was a lot nicer than Vietnam. I got a job immediately. Being there caused me to grow up, I think, a lot faster than I would have. And I was very happy to be home, and I enjoyed it, and it was not a problem for me whatsoever.
Adjusting to civilian life again was a little strange and difficult. It's like 1 week you're in a combat zone, and the next week I was enrolled in college, and feeling so much older than every other student that was in that college. That was pretty difficult. I had a wife to come home to, which made things a lot easier, and I owe her a lot for all the years she's put up with me. Adjusting was keeping my mouth shut, forgetting it as fast as you could, no matter what it took to do the forgetting. Yeah, that includes substance abuse. I don't know. In a lot of ways, I think I'm still adjusting to civilian life.
So I get back from Vietnam on March 31st, 1971, and it was great. We came over on Flying Tigers Airway, and of course the aircraft was filled with soldiers of all rank, and it was real quiet before we came in, and as we sat down, a big cheer went out, and we were so happy to be back in the United States. And got out of the, got down on the tarmac, and half the guys down there kissing the tarmac. So glad to be home. But you know, that next day we were out of the service, like that, boom. No debriefing, nothing. We were just turned loose on the streets, basically. And I would say, along with most of the guys, we were nuts. We were completely crazy. And I got into my car and drove across the United States, visiting friends of mine from Vietnam and family and that. And went from coast to coast, came into Fort Lewis, Washington, and then went down to actually the Bay Area here, and Santa Clara, and picked up a Camaro that I bought when I was in flight school, and got in it and just started driving. So that was it. You know, just came back and out of the service, and actually ended up driving across the United States about 3 times.
Okay, coming back to civilian life. That's like changing the channel in your mind there. You're off in the killing zones, you're pulling triggers on people, all of a sudden, click, you're back to civilian life. After all the years of people coming back from the war and all the situations that had come up, you'd think that they would have debriefed or done something to get you back into the mainstream. They dropped the ball completely on that. I'm still paying the price more or less for that. I'm dealing with the PTSD situation, all that kind of stuff. You're just thrown out onto the street, nothing. You know, my family's still kind of wondering, well, what happened to that guy? You know, there's a lot of situations that go on that are painful, that you got to drag around with you for a long time. You know, right now I'm going through a little bit of stuff with the VA and all, but when I contacted the government, I'd say, the first response was that I wasn't even in the war. Second response was, after more letters, was, oh, all of your information burned up somewhere in some building somewhere, and they weren't even going to honor 2 distinguished flying crosses that I earned over there, because they said there was no such thing. And the only way I got that was my mom kept all the paperwork, good old mom. So she had the paperwork saying, you know, of my 2 distinguished flying crosses, blah blah blah. And that, you know, that helped. You know, that is finally recognized now. That, you know, we finally get to march in some of the parades now, and that's nice. Thank you very much. Can you tell I'm a little angry still? These were all Americans, and they're all trying to do their job. They're trying to be good people, and they're treated wrong for a long time.
I think there are similarities between the Vietnamese War and the Iraq War, and there are also dissimilarities. In the Vietnam War, the enemy was communism, but the VC fighting were very much a part of the population of that area. There was strong influence from North Vietnam, but that's still Vietnam. But what we were accomplishing there was essentially fighting communism in a battleground someplace outside of the United States, really ostensibly to avoid having to fight them in the United States, which would have been the eventual outcome if we had been completely placid as far as communist expansion is concerned. And I think we face the same thing today in Iraq. Whether there was justification for the invasion in Iraq or not, I don't really know, and I wouldn't argue that question. But the net effect is that there is a radical Muslim effort which is terrorism, and they would like to fight America, and their preference would be to fight America in New York and in San Francisco and Chicago, because that's where they could inflict the maximum amount of damage. But having engaged them in Iraq and in Afghanistan, we are essentially keeping them busy there, and we have forced the battlefield again outside of the United States to a place of our choosing so that we can fight them in Iraq. And even though we are losing lives in Iraq, and no one likes to see lives lost, I think it's important that the number of lives that we're losing, the lives that are being sacrificed, are in effect saving much larger number of lives that would be lost if we ever get to the place where we have to fight the terrorists in our own land in America. So for that reason, I think both wars are equally justified. They are there in order to protect our homeland, and in a way we are fortunate that we have the military, we have the strength to move the battlefield to the position of our choosing so that we can fight it in some other place. I think we're probably more fortunate in Iraq in that although it's difficult to fight there, I don't think the difficulties are near what they were in Vietnam when Americans were trying to fight in the jungles in places that were, very adverse to them, and they had probably not the kind of training and technology they needed to do it effectively. I think we are doing a much more effective job in Iraq perhaps than we did in Vietnam.
In comparison, the way we did things in Vietnam and the way their young guys are doing them in Iraq now are very similar in a lot of ways. People are dying slowly and pretty much without cause, I would say. It's got to be very tough on these young guys as they come home. We need to be there, not only as Vietnam vets, but as mothers, brothers, fathers, sisters, aunts, uncles. Do the right thing by these guys that wasn't done for the Vietnam vet. And you'll see the Vietnam vets will be there to help them, where nobody was for us except ourselves. So we had to go within into ourselves to learn how to readjust. I think the political ramifications of this war are in a lot of ways similar to the Vietnam War, whereas the stuff being shipped over there, a lot of it's being tested just like it was in Vietnam, where took excellent weapons away from us, the M14, and gave us the Mattel toy, the M16, and it wasn't worth a damn. A lot of good Marines died because of that experimentation. I think in this war, there's a lot of people going to get rich, just like people got rich in the Vietnam War. Everything sent to Vietnam was sent Sealand. Lady Bird Johnson owned that. She had her people from Bell Helicopter in there repairing the choppers instead of the military doing it. You got a lot of the same stuff going on in Iraq, and it casts a lot of doubt on the validity. So the troops have a much harder time maintaining that edge of concentration and alertness and awareness, because there's so many different things going on that make them think about it instead of watching every little thing, their job. That's probably how a lot of these car bombs and suicide bombers get close enough to hurt these guys. They need to tighten up and whack them first, ask questions later.
I think one of the terrible things that came out of the Vietnam War is America sort of lost its will to fight. You know, that war was, I think, completely different than what's going on in Iraq today and in the entire Middle East. And one thing that concerns me greatly is the American public seems to have lost its will to win. Everything has to be done very quickly. You know, we're all living on a quarterly basis. You know, there doesn't seem to be the willingness to make sacrifices, you know, for what I think are long-term goals that we need to really achieve, you know, to get stability into a region that is, you know, still living in the 16th, 17th century. It's very dangerous for us. Like it or not, they sit on 25% of the world's oil reserves, and I'm sure most of you drove your car to get here today. So that's kind of the practical side of life, but you know, I don't think the parallels are really very accurate between Vietnam and Iraq, at least in my opinion today.
When asked, you know, how is Iraq similar to Vietnam, I think they're similar in the respect that they're both very difficult situations to have a quote-unquote clean win. I'm not so sure you do that these days, but I think Iraq is very different. I truly believe we were attacked. I truly believe that terrorists are bullies, and if you just back away from bullies, they just beat you up more. And I think unless we went in there and we got rid of Saddam Hussein, and we are doing what we can do now to give the people of Iraq a free election, that the terrorists are just going to attack you somewhere else, and you have to stop somewhere. And it's unfortunate that we're the guys. You know, they had a couple of figures that came out, something like 50,000 people a year die of car accidents, and some other ridiculous number of people who die from smoking and whatever. And it's very unfortunate that we've lost upwards of 1,000 of our young men, but that's a very small price to pay for freedom, and that's kind of the way I feel about it.
I believe you can compare the Vietnam War to the current war in Iraq, if only that it's also a guerrilla warfare. You know, we're losing many people through attrition. I think that's similarity enough. I'm real glad I don't have a son involved in it or a daughter involved in it. And I think the vets that are returning from Iraq are going to be subject to a lot of the same problems that those of us who've been fighting for years after being back from Vietnam.
So in comparing the Vietnam War to the war in Iraq right now, I think there's a lot of similarities. As far as the soldier on the ground, as I can see it, he's faced with you know, a similar free-floating anxiety, because you don't know where the enemy is or who he is and where he's coming from. In Vietnam, they had the ground cover and all that. In Iraq, you have the cities, the buildings, and it's just it's a different environment, definitely. But there's a lot of similarities in there too, and also the question of why are we there? You know?
George Weber asked me to emphasize one point, which I think the other speakers would agree to. And that is that those who served over in Vietnam were very patriotic, good young Americans who answered their country's call to duty. They chose not to flee. Their love for their country was so great, they went over to land into a combat, into a battle that was not their fault. It was not the country of their choosing, and they did the best they could under very difficult circumstances. And for that, we owe all the vets respect. Thank you. I'm Peter O'Brien.
She asked me if I was American, and I said yes, I was American. And I said, what do you think about the Americans being here in your country? And her response was kind of interesting. She said, well, you know, First, the Chinese came and they were here and they took my rice. And then the Japanese came and they took my rice. And then the French came and they took my rice. And now the VC are here and they're taking my rice. I suppose when you people come, you'll want my rice too.
As for sacrificing, everybody over there sacrificed. They all gave some gave all. And the old adage that the rich boys weren't in that war, I'm here to tell you that they were. I knew a Navy admiral's son that was in it. He was just a E4 grunt like me. There was another guy, Otto Charles Graybill. He was the only sole surviving son, heir to the Graybill pipe fortune. He died right up by the Ben High River on what was called McNamara's Line. The last thing he said was tell his family he got hit in the head so he didn't suffer. When in reality, he slowly bled to death in that scorching heat.
In my job, in my position, what I'm thinking about is where's the bad guy, what's going on, how do I defeat him, how do I maneuver my troops, because that was basically my job. It's hot, scary, dirty, smelly work. It's confusing. It's hard many times to figure out what to do, where to go.
I had one of the first night flights into North Vietnam, the Haiphong area, when we were allowed to go in there. And as we were flying in, it was amazing because it turned out to be like the 4th of July. It was at night and just everything lit up. They were firing surface-to-air missiles like they were going out of style. And so a lot of explosions, a lot of chatter on the radio, a lot of sounds like I'm hit, I'm going down, and so it was actually terrifying.
We were attacked twice by aircraft. Of course, we were told the enemy didn't have aircraft. And so, what goes through your mind when that happens? For me, it was fire, because fire is terrible on a ship. And for some reason, it was like, oh my God, it's on fire. And that's the one thing that's sort of stuck in my mind.
Friends, I was taught not to make friends because you never knew when you were going to lose them. And you had to be around to patch up whoever was left, no matter what your emotions were doing. But it was impossible. It was impossible. I think the closest friends I ever had in my life were in Vietnam.
So the anti-war protests back in America affected all of us. That was one of the other things that we discussed in the tents and out in the field. Everybody had their own opinion about it, of course. Some people were really angry about it and felt that we should be supported back at home. And actually, I took a different view of it. I felt, and I expressed this too, I felt that none of us who were there really wanted to be there after we'd been there for any period of time and saw what was going on. And I said, these people back there who are protesting are just trying to get us home. And I said, more power to them, So I didn't harbor any ill feelings about the protesters at all.
When the other chopper came back to check out and find out where he was, they found a burning heap down in the jungle, but they did find 2 chutes. One I heard was stretched out across the trees, like the guy tried to grab the chute on the way out of the helicopter and hold on to it and pull the ring, which he just didn't have any time. It didn't open. The other one, he used his chute. He was stuck in the trees and he used his let-down tape. So he was alive and he got down somewhere down in Cambodia there. The official report goes is they were either killed or missing, and that doesn't set right with me. It hasn't set right ever, because some other son was down there, my friend, and they more or less just let him go.